The aim of this project was essentially to produce as many elements as I could to give the audience as big an idea as possible as to what this musical would look like were it on stage and being produced. So there were 3 components. The first was music, the second was costuming, and the third was set design. The first one, music, was easily the largest and the most challenging component. So what I did was I went through a plot summary of the movie and then put in markers as to where I thought a song might go and what that song would be trying to convey in this part of the musical. Then I kind of went through, gave them names, and gave myself an idea of what it would sound like, and then I picked my 3 favourites from those. So there were, I think, 15 songs altogether, and the 3 that I chose were Brilliant Like Me, Ghost Stories, and Will's Lament. I put a bit of thought into which ones I would choose because these are all very different songs, so it gives a bit of diversity.
Brilliant like me, it ain't hard to achieve. Madness sets you free if you take on the key. If you're thinking you ain't doing, take the action in your palm. Want to live like me, you'll see madness is brilliant.
So the first one, Brilliant Like Me, is this big, flashy, chorusy number. That's the song that you can hear playing right now in the background. Kind of gives you an idea of what it sounds like. It's predominantly between Will and Jack, both on the run from the Navy, and so they escape under a boat with an air pocket on the ocean floor. And it's actually inspired by a line Will says to Jack, "This is either madness or brilliance," and Jack says, "It's remarkable how often those traits will coincide." And then that kind of launches into this big number where Jack is trying to tell Will that madness is brilliance and that his way of life as a pirate is an excellent way to live and you have so much freedom. And Will is trying to tell him, no, insanity is not good and it's all well and good to have freedom, but you can still have freedom and have a moral compass. And they're both kind of having this argument. A couple of songs that inspired this one was The Other Side from The Greatest Showman, that beautiful sound from Beetlejuice, and also Word to the Wise from Hadestown. They're all quite jazzy and they're all quite competitive and excitable, which is essentially the feel of this song. It's very bizarre and wacky and unique. And then the second, Ghost Stories, is kind of this really traditional, deep, ominous villain song. So it's mostly, for the first 3 quarters, the villain Barbossa singing, and then in the last quarter he gets his whole Black Pearl crew to join in, and they're all kind of terrifying Elizabeth in their skeleton form. Ghost Stories is all about Barbossa explaining to Elizabeth the backstory and the history of them as skeleton pirates. It's basically just conveying the scale of their curse and how far they're willing to go just to be human again. And so, although it's quite a terrifying piece, it's also quite emotive and it's very strong and powerful because they just want to be human again. A couple of songs that inspired this one was Look Down from Les Miserables and The Wall from Hadestown. And there's also a piece in A Very Potter Musical to Dance Again, and the introduction to that one even is also kind of very reminiscent and it's anecdotal, which is similar to what this piece is about. And then the third song is Will's Lament, and this is entirely a solo song. No one else is on stage at any point during the song except for Will. Will's Lament is exactly what it sounds like. It's Will lamenting over the fact that because of his social position, he can't be with Elizabeth, who he's been in love with his entire life. And it's quite an emotional song. A couple of songs that inspired this one was A Song of Hope from the Lord of the Rings musical and Santa Fe from Newsies. So kind of the process for all of these songs in creating them was a lot of sitting at the piano for hours, just fiddling around with notes. Finding a key that I liked was a big part, and I basically just went between back and forth, writing a couple of lyrics and then finding a tune for it. But I got there eventually, and so once I had this complete set of lyrics and a melody to go with it, then I went back and I I found the chords that went nicely with the melody and the singing part. And it was quite difficult, especially with Brilliant Like Me, because there's so much weird key changes and it was difficult trying to find that balance between the harmonies and the chords. And then once I had finished writing the lyrics and the melody and the chords, then I went back on notation software and I used the chords predominantly to write this song. Then I had to put that together and mix it to make sure that I had the right balance of instruments, because I couldn't do that on the notation software. And especially with Will's Lament, it was quite difficult because it was quite expressive. I had decided to play the piano rather than notate it. It would be easier for me if I just played it in my own way and was able to express it exactly the way I wanted it. So it was quite difficult to mix that song, because then I had the perfectly timed and notated cello and violin part, and then it had my imperfect timing, and so it was very difficult to adjust finding that balance. So the one that I produced the most and I spent the most time on was Brilliant Like Me. This one was very difficult to create because I wanted it to sound just right, which made it very difficult because there were a lot of tiny little details that had to be perfected. So the second song, Ghost Stories, was the one that I actually produced the least, which was a bit disappointing for me because this was my personal favourite. I've written the chords for it and I've written the lyrics and I've notated the first couple of bars of the song, but it is not as produced as the other two songs. And then the third song, Will's Lament, is different to the others. While the first two had a bass guitar, a piano and drums, Will's Lament only has piano, cello and violin. It's quite a soft song, it's quite moving. And so this was the one that I kind of got produced in the middle. It has the instrumental backing, but the vocal part is not yet recorded. The second component, costuming, was a bit of a challenge, especially in terms of creating criteria. I went back and forth a lot with my mentor trying to figure out what exactly my criteria would be. Initially, I had actually decided to write the script, but it was quite difficult to write the script entirely without having every song and knowing exactly what every song would be, which I didn't have the time for. So instead, I decided to produce other elements. I created two costumes, both of which apply to one of my songs. So the first one is a jellyfish costume, which goes in Brilliant Like Me when they're dancing underwater and it's all wild. So this one is quite a crazy, wacky costume. I designed this one myself, but it was really my grandma that was able to pull a lot of this together for me, which I'm very grateful for. And it came out as this really bright and unique and jazzy costume, which really brings out the madness that Jack is bringing to the piece. So the second one is a skeleton pirate, and it was quite challenging trying to figure out how I was going to get the skeleton pirates to transform into their skeleton form almost instantaneously, because in the movie they become skeletons under the moonlight, and especially in the last couple of scenes there's these big fights and there's this constant flashing between strips of moonlight and now it's shadowed, and it keeps changing between the skeleton and real. And I really loved that scene and I really wanted to bring that through in the musical. So I debated on having body doubles that were dressed up as skeletons and then body doubles that were dressed up as just the human form. But that I think wouldn't have really worked because it would have been very obvious, the transition, and it would have broken the flow of what was happening, especially during songs and sword fights. I debated having an underlayer which had the skeleton costume, so all the actor had to do was strip off their outer layer and then underneath they would have the skeleton one, but again it seemed a little bit too inconvenient, especially when you end up having all of these clothes all over the floor. It seemed like it wasn't going to work. But my mum came up with this idea to use, well, glow sticks, which it turned into UV paint, and it was quite difficult finding UV paint to begin with, trying to ensure that it was the kind of UV paint that was only showing up under a UV light and not just under regular light. It had to be fully invisible under regular light, and it also had to be non-toxic and safe to paint onto skin. So there was quite a lot of research involved in finding that, but eventually we did, and it has worked effectively. And so what I decided was to paint this UV paint onto the pirate costume, just their regular costume. No layers needed, and you just switch on a UV light and all of a sudden they're a ghost pirate. And then the third component was set design. And I actually designed all of the sets that would be necessary. And so I've got a few sets that double up. There's one set where it's on one side a town and on the other side it's the interior of the Swan residence and the Tortuga bar. And so in that way I've kind of used different set pieces to use for multiple locations. The one that I ended up producing was the ship battle between the Navy ship and the pirate ship. I had a few different ideas of what I could do for this one. Originally there wasn't going to be an entire ship. It was just going to be the mast on the back of the side stage. I wasn't really sure how to make it look ship-like without having something huge and difficult or permanent. I wanted to be able to move it. In the end, I actually got my inspiration from the Pirates of Penzance. They've got a mobile miniature ship, and not the entire cast could fit on it, but you still get that effect of a big ship, and you can really play around with this mobile ship on wheels. You can have the crew moving it and spinning it during ship battles and dance numbers, so I think it would have a very exciting and very theatrical effect visually. And so I decided to go with two of those, and it's quite an open set piece as well. It's not closed off, so the audience can really see what's happening. In this project, I especially grew my knowledge of music, and it was a very big learning experience for me. I really enjoyed growing in that area, and I hope to expand my knowledge more. I'm hoping to continue creating this musical, to write all of the songs, to create a script, and see where it goes if it could be produced.